Mike McCool here in the Royal Examiner Studio, and with me today is Grace Morrison. Grace is the independent candidate for our VA District 31 as a delegate. So Grace has been in here before, and we just seen you at the candidate forum the chamber put on, and so we wanted her to come back in because now this is where it gets nitty-gritty as we get closer to the election.
It's a spicy meatball.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of stuff going on. I know Grace has a fundraiser coming up for Friday.
Yes.
And so we want to give her a little plug there. But fill us in on what's been going on.
Well, just honestly, a lot of what I do is getting with the people and talking. And what I'm hearing from most is, man, we really hope this goes through because we're so tired of everything being kind of steered. It's almost like, there's this supernatural force, even though it's just a machine of people that steers people in. And truthfully, the people are left at the end of the day without representation.
Right.
And parties are represented, and corporations are represented. We talked a little bit about that earlier. Mm-hmm. And the people are left without someone who is interested in what they're saying, what they're thinking, how are their constitutional rights being protected. And so, it's one thing to talk about that. It's another thing to go, what does it really look like to have a representative that isn't purchased by a larger entity, but is actually there for the constituents that voted them in. And I'm no expert on that. I'm not a professional here. I'm just doing my best to take one step in front of the other and make sure that at all times that's who I am.
Right.
So,
you know that, of course, you're a conservative candidate.
Yes.
And so I guess you call that an independent conservative.
Independent conservative, yes, sir.
So people know that you're not going to be way out here in left field somewhere.
Sure.
But it would seem to be nice that, the parties would present their case and this party would present their case, and the independents can just sit back and say, well, I'm going to pick the best one because I represent our county, right? Is that kind of how you look at it?
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's one way of putting it.
What's the best way,
So I really feel like what is important is that we understand the Virginia Constitution. And to be quite transparent with you, this is the first time I've read it. I have never read through the Virginia Constitution.
We just assume, don't we?
And I'm still working through the Virginia Constitution, but I have been awestruck at what our forefathers put in that to protect each one of us. I love what it says about public schools. I wish I had brought it in. I have a copy I carry around with me all the time because I want to know what is it that I'm protecting as I represent the people who vote for me. Sure. And it says that it is an intrinsic right of the citizens of our state to have a proper form of education. So it is a way of serving our community to make sure that all our kids coming through here can read, can write, can do mathematical equations and that kind of thing so that they're better prepared to be independent adults. Sure. And so they were so detailed in their formation of this document. It causes a reverence.
It's amazing when you go back and you read the documents that were written back in that time and these guys weren't old. Most of them were much younger than we are. And we always think about them being old men, but and the details and things that were covered, and here we are 200 years later, and it's still applying to exactly the way. I think they must have some divine intervention.
There's no doubt about that. In fact, you and I were talking about some classes that I teach, and just last week we were talking in one of my worldview classes about truth. What is truth? And I wrote a statement on the board that is kind of a theme of the university that I graduated from. And the statement says, all truth is God's truth. And that'll make you scratch your head for a minute if you think about it, if you can't discern between what's truth and what's a fact. And so we had a really great discussion among our students about what is the difference between something that is true and something that is factual. And we decided the difference is truth is eternal. There's an if it's true today, it'll also be true 10,000 years from now.
Right.
And that's the distinction between truth and fact. So
Right.
I think they had an eternal factor in their ability to write those documents.
Yes.
I mean, it's truly remarkable.
Yeah, it is great. I always like the one I tell people, we don't get the government we want, we get the government we deserve.
Oh, my.
And when you got to think about that for a while, sometimes we want something, but we've seen that all through history. Governments that thought were going to happen, and well, you know what happened.
Which goes back to the Constitution, both the state Constitution for the Commonwealth of Virginia and the U.S. Constitution, which clearly articulates that in order for us to maintain freedom and autonomy and independence, we must take responsibility personally for that. That means I can't just say, hey, I'm going to check this box and so is going to take care of this for me.
Right.
No, I've got to be intimately invested in this.
Right.
This is our home, our freedom, our autonomy, and I have a role to play too, and all of us do.
Well, one of the topics that was brought up right now, obviously it's a hot thing in the state, and that's about public schools that you mentioned, and about I know the governor's really parental choice wants to get parents more involved into that. Where do you stand on those kind of things?
Well, I think the best thing for communities, for families, and for education is that we're not segregating and taking children out of their families to indoctrinate them into something and separating them from their family. Don't tell your parents, we're going to do this, but this is whatever. And that sounds rather ambiguous. And I thought for a while, this can't be like public schools don't say that. And yet, I'm looking at public schools in the state of Virginia where they're being told things and the parents are not being involved and they don't know to say, hey, I don't, that's not really in the best interest of my child. I'd like them not to participate in that because they're not being informed.
Right.
So that's a statewide issue that's very much relevant. And I think the best thing for all of us is that, when I was a little girl, this is the best way I can describe. When I was a little girl, we had volunteer moms and dads that would come in. Sure. They'd pass out papers. They would always bring cookies or something. Sure. I mean, it was always fun when somebody's parent came in for the day. And I don't recall a day until I got into high school that there wasn't some kind of parent in the house doing something for students and building trust in our communities with our whole families. Sure. When we're serving families, I mean, when you're educating a child, you're serving a family.
Sure.
And so it's really important that we don't forget that this is the posterity of our people and that we just like as a delegate, there's a sacred trust of the people, right? You're a trustee of the people's trust. That's literally in the Virginia Constitution. As teachers, as educators, as principals, as school board members, we're stewarding the sacred trust of these families. Mm-hmm. And so dividing is well, it's not good to say it mildly. Mm-hmm. And if we look at what happened in Europe during the 30s and 40s, it's even worse than that. And we don't want to repeat a history that maybe we've forgotten because we haven't been doing our own due diligence. Yeah. We don't want to deserve that kind of government.
Most of us, the kids get on the bus, go to school, and then once they walk out the door, we don't really get involved. Or, I guess they're doing a good job.
Gosh, I hope that's not the truth, but I'm afraid it is.
It is. Well, I guess they come home, they can read, so I guess they're doing their job,
Sure.
But there's a lot of, you got to know what's going on.
And cultivating, we're talking mammoth problems that need very practical, intricate steps. But we have moms and dads who are financially strapped. And they're stressed out trying to provide basic needs for their families. And so on some level, just sending John and Kathleen to the bus is a relief to get focused on this, which is survival mode. And there's got to be a way as a people for us to work more efficiently as a community so that we're not all in survival mode.
Right.
And one of the components of that is our faith-based communities, which should be serving. And we have some of those locally. I wish I could remember off the top of my head, but I know there are, especially in the fall, where they have like parents' night out, and they've got great activities for kids, and it's free, and moms and dads can reconnect and rekindle and come fresh for their families. We see it a lot in Christmas time, serving families, but it's, the African proverb, it takes a village. It takes our communities working together, and Americans are so isolated. We're so intrinsic and self-involved that we forget, hey, it's not just me, mine. It's we have this whole system here, and learning how to be that again when we've got all sorts of nefarious things separating and creating, like at COVID, we all went into our houses and hid. So
you go to Virginia. How are you going to do all that? What's your plan?
Right? I know. So part of my plan is to look very carefully into education and find out what's the driving force behind our practices. I do have some concerns about the way things are going right now. I have concerns even about our governor's premise on parental choice and school choice. And I'm wondering how informed parents actually are in what's happening. I'm not going to go into the details of the bill, but there are bills that even passed through Republicans. And just in the last week, one Republican delegate was able to read through the bill that was brought to his attention and was absolutely shocked at what was actually included in the bill. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is make sure we're reading these things and we know what we're passing for our kids and our families.
Yeah, we've heard that before. Well, we just got to pass it now. We'll worry about what's in it later, right?
Right. And that's the problem with going into office with somebody else's agenda in mind instead of the agenda of the people and protecting that sacred Constitution. If it is just about getting stuff done, then things are going to get done that we're responsible for, and we're going to be accountable for, but we didn't even know we're there because it was just push, push, push. Sure. And there needs to be very serious accountability on that practice, which is basically ubiquitous in government.
Well, you have a fundraiser coming up Friday.
Yes, sir.
And you're going to have a special guest. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
So, Tom Homan is going to come and speak, and Tom is our former acting ICE director under President Trump. And he works now for, I'll be meeting him for the first time on Friday. But I have a friend who is an attorney for a nonprofit called Early, which is immigration reform. I'm going to forget the rest of it. Bless the Lord. I shouldn't have even tried to do that. That's terrible. IRLI.
Right.
And they are a nonprofit, and they are in the constant process of protecting our borders in the United States of America. And we have issues like we talked about the other night at the forum. We have drug issues. We have trafficking issues. We have suicide and other issues that we confront every day, day in and day out. And I said rather clumsily that evening that we should, like Barney Fife says, nip it in the bud.
Right.
And one of the ways we do that is we say, where's this coming from? And one of the voices that evening said that we would never stop the drug problem. And I have to say, why not? Why not?
Yeah.
So we're not going to plan.
It's created a whole industry.
Sure. But we're not going to plan for failure here.
Right.
We're going to get to the root of it. And I don't want to disparage any individual culture, community, or nationality. It's not about that, Okay, we are e pluribus unum, right? That's who we are as the United States. We are out of many one, and all are welcome. I don't care where you come from, as long as you come legally, right?
All right.
But there are people who would seek to see the demise of the United States of America, and they want to see it crushed from within. So they want to bring in substances that will destroy Americans. And unfortunately, there are leaders in our nation who can be purchased. And that's why it keeps going and going. And so Tom's going to talk about the border issues. And we say, well, Virginia's not a border state. And he would argue that all states in this time in history are border states. And what do we need to do? What do we need to do? What do our legislators need to do to ensure the safety and freedom of all of us?
Well, sounds like it'd be an interesting evening.
It's going to be
So that's
quite
Friday,
tonight.
this coming Friday.
This coming Friday at 6 p.m. at the Shenandoah Valley Golf Club.
Okay.
And if you are clergy or law enforcement, there is no charge for you. If you are clergy and law enforcement and feel so inclined to donate, I would be ever more grateful.
Sure.
But it's $50 for a ticket. It'll be a full dinner and a couple beverages of your choice. And it will be a cram-packed evening of information. And then I will speak following Tom. I'm not sure why I did that to myself, but hopefully I will. I'll engage the community as well. But I'll be sharing my heart and my vision for how I'm going to approach this in Richmond.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, Grace, we'll maybe see you on Friday.
Thank you.
And we want you to come back a couple more times before the magic day of November 7th.
Sure.
Early voting has started.
It has started.
And I understand it's pretty heavy. So that started Friday, the 22nd. Yep. And so we encourage you, but you still have time if you're not a registered voter. You can still register.
Just a couple weeks, right?
Yes.
October
14th, I think it is. So, but check it out. You still can do it. And get on there and get informed and watch the interviews that we've done with all the candidates. And so form your own opinion.
Absolutely.
And do that. I think it's important for people to be involved in their own government.
Please get involved. Please get involved. All hands on deck.
Yeah, it's great.
Yep.
Again, Grace, I really appreciate it. And we'll see you maybe in a couple weeks. Okay?
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.